3 very scary, mysterious creatures, horror stories. The town of Black Hollow had always been a place of whispers. People did not ask questions here. They knew better. The woods that surrounded the town, they were not normal. Casey had spent years away living in the city where streetlights drowned out the dark and silence never truly existed. But now she was back in the place where she had grown up. And something was waiting for her. That night she was driving home. The road was empty. The trees on either side stretched high, their twisted branches reaching, like skeletal fingers clawing at the sky. The moon was barely visible, swallowed by thick clouds, casting everything in a cold, suffocating darkness. Something felt off. The air was too still. No wind, no crickets, no distant rustling in the underbrush, just silence. Then she saw it. A figure stood at the edge of the road. Her breath caught. She slowed down, her fingers tightening around the steering wheel. Her headlights washed over the figure, and her stomach turned. It was tall, too tall. Its limbs were thin, its posture unnatural, as if its bones were just a little too long, its skin stretched just a little too tight, and it was just standing there, watching. Casey's pulse hammered in her ears. Something deep in her gut screamed at her to go, but she could not move, could not breathe. Then the figure tilted its head. Slow, deliberate, like it was studying her. A sharp, cold shiver crawled up her spine, spreading through her chest, her arms, her fingertips. Her breath came out shaky, uneven. Then she slammed her foot on the gas. The tires screeched, the car lurched forward, and she sped down the road, gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her heart pounded. Her mind raced. She needed to get home. She needed to get inside. But as she glanced into the rearview mirror, the road behind her was empty. She swallowed hard, trying to steady her breathing. Maybe she had imagined it. Maybe it had been a shadow, a trick of the light. Maybe, number she had seen it. She was sure of it. By the time she reached her house on the far edge of town, her nerves were frayed, her hands shaking. She pulled into the driveway, shut off the engine, and sat there for a moment, her chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. The feeling had not left. She felt watched. Swallowing hard, she stepped out of the car, rushed to the front door, and locked it behind her. She was safe. Was she? The house was quiet. Too quiet. She checked the windows. Locked, curtains drawn. She double-checked the doors, deadbolt secure. Still the feeling lingered. Something was wrong. Casey shook her head. Enough, it was in her head. Just exhaustion, just the dark playing tricks on her. She turned off the lights and climbed into bed, but she could not sleep. The silence, it felt too heavy. Then, a sound. Tap. A soft, deliberate tap against her bedroom window. Casey's body locked in place, her breath caught in her throat. She did not want to look. She did not want to see, but something forced her to turn her head, and she wished she had not. The figure was standing outside her window, tall, unmoving, watching. Its head tilted. A deep, suffocating terror gripped her chest, making it impossible to breathe. The glass was the only thing separating them. Thin glass. Her heart pounded against her ribs, her body frozen in place. Then, the figure moved. Not like a person. Not normally. Its body twisted, fluid, unnatural, wrong. Casey scrambled backward, her hands shaking as she reached for her phone. But the second she blinked, it was gone. The window was empty. Silence. Casey sat there frozen, her pulse thundering in her ears. She was not alone. The people of Black Hollow never asked questions. This is very terrifying. Mysterious Creatures, Horror Story Number 2. The road stretched endlessly into the darkness, a thin winding path cutting through an ocean of golden wheat. The stalks swayed slowly, whispering in the night breeze. It should have been peaceful, but something felt wrong. Felicity gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles turning white. The glow from her headlights barely touched the blackness ahead, leaving the road feeling endless, empty. She was tired. 5 hours behind the wheel, alone with nothing but the soft hum of the engine and her own uneasy thoughts. But that was not what was bothering her. It was her father's voice. Do not stop. No matter what you see, no matter what you hear. Those were the only words he had said before hanging up. No explanation, no follow-up. Just that. Warning. She had tried calling back, over and over, but there was no answer. A chill crawled up her spine as she exhaled slowly, trying to shake off the growing unease in her chest. Maybe he was just being paranoid. Maybe there was nothing to fear. Or maybe... A flicker of movement. Felicity's pulse stuttered. Something shifted in the wheat field. She turned her head just slightly, just enough to see beyond the edge of the road. At first, there was nothing, just endless rows of wheat swaying in the wind. Then, there it was. A shape, low to the ground, moving between the stalks. Her stomach twisted. She forced her eyes back onto the road, hands tightening around the wheel. It was probably just an animal, right? But deep down, she knew better. Then, something stepped onto the road. A figure. Felicity's breath caught in her throat. It stood motionless in her headlights, its form long, thin, unnatural. Her vision blurred for a second, her brain struggling to make sense of what she was seeing. The limbs were too long, the frame was too thin, and the face? There was no face, just smooth, featureless skin where eyes, a nose, a mouth should have been. Her chest seized with terror. A sharp gasp tore from her lips as her body reacted before her mind could. She yanked the steering wheel. The tires screeched, the car swerving wildly to the side. The wheat field blurred past in streaks of gold and black as the car skidded, then stabilized. Felicity's heart slammed against her ribs. She did not stop. She did not look back. She just drove. The road stretched forever, the night pressing in around her. But she was not alone. A sound, a scraping noise. Her stomach knotted painfully as she realized it was coming from above. Something was on the roof of her car. The weight shifted, metal creaking under it. Then, knock. A soft, deliberate tapping against the driver's side window. Felicity's breath hitched. She did not look. She refused to look. But in her peripheral vision, a hand, or something like a hand, long fingers, too many joints, pressed against the glass. It was waiting. Knock, knock, software patient. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She pressed her foot harder against the gas pedal, forcing the car to go faster, faster, too fast. She had to get home. She had to get inside. Then, the knocking stopped. The weight on the roof vanished. Silence. Thick. Suffocating. Felicity wanted to believe it was over, but she knew better. And then, the house appeared. The porch light was on, casting a dim glow over the wooden steps. Her father stood in the doorway. She barely managed to put the car in park before scrambling out, her legs shaking beneath her. The moment she saw his face, her breath caught. He looked horrified. "You stopped," he said. His voice was tight. Felicity swallowed. "Dad, what?" "Did you look at it?" he interrupted. Her mouth opened, but no words came. The memory of that thing on the road, the hand on the glass. Slowly she nodded. Her father's face fell. A silence stretched between them. Heavy. Unbearable. Then, a knock at the door. Software patient. Waiting. Felicity's breath shuddered out of her lungs. Her father's grip on her arms tightened. "You should not have stopped," he whispered. And then, the knocking came again. Knock, knock. Waiting. This is very creepy. Mysterious Creatures Horror Story number 3. The first time Eldra saw it, she thought her mind was playing tricks on her. It was a night like any other. Fog rolling in thick, swallowing the road ahead. The air was cold, damp and heavy with silence. She was driving home late from work, the only sound the hum of her engine and the faint crackle of the radio. The headlights barely cut through the mist, and the road stretched on like a never-ending tunnel. And then it happened. Movement. Just a flicker in the corner of her eye. Something wrong. Too tall. Too thin. Eldra's heart skipped a beat. Her foot slammed on the brake and the car skidded, tires screeching against the wet gravel. She turned her head quickly to the side of the road, but nothing. The fog shifted, swallowed the shape whole. She let out a breath she did not realize she was holding. It's fine, it's fine. She was tired. Her mind was playing tricks. But even as she said it, her pulse did not slow. The road seemed darker. The trees around her were cloaked in shadows, stretching long and eerie, their branches swaying in a way that was unnatural. Eldra's hands tightened on the steering wheel. There was something about the air tonight, something off. Then, the lights. The street lights overhead flickered one by one, buzzing. First one, then another. It was as if something was moving beneath them, disturbing their steady glow. Eldra's breath quickened. She could feel the tension in the air. Something was wrong? Her foot pressed harder on the accelerator. The car surged forward, desperate to reach home, to get away from whatever this was. But the fog seemed to thicken, clinging to the road like it was alive, wrapping around the tires. The headlights barely reached far enough to see more than a few feet ahead. And then the radio. A crackle, then a voice. Heavy, ragged, breathing. Eldra's eyes went wide. She reached for the radio dial, but her fingers trembled too much. The sound, it wasn't music, it wasn't a broadcast, it was breathing. So close. Her hands were frozen, gripped tight on the wheel, her knuckles white. Every breath felt shallow. Every thump of her heart echoed in her chest. She dared not look in the rearview mirror. She did not want to see what was behind her. But she had to. Slowly, her hand moved. She couldn't stop it. Her thumb brushed against the mirror. Her eyes locked on the reflection. Nothing. Nothing but the empty back seat. Eldra let out a shaky breath. It's fine. She wasn't sure if she was trying to convince herself or the darkness outside, but the feeling did not go away. That presence, that feeling of being watched, it was still there. The fog, the silence, it felt like the world was closing in on her, pressing in from all sides. Something was waiting. Her headlights flickered again. The radio crackled once more. The breathing. Closer this time. Almost. In the car. Eldra's foot slammed on the brake. The car jolted to a stop, tires screeching against the gravel. Her seatbelt locked painfully around her chest, pinning her in place. Her heart raced, pulse thundering in her ears. There was nothing. Just the empty night. Her hands shook as she turned the key in the ignition, her breath shaky, ragged. She quickly glanced at the rearview mirror again. Nothing. The road stretched on, a thick blanket of fog smothering the world. She had to keep moving. She could not stay here. Not with that feeling in her chest. Not with that breathing. When she reached her driveway, she parked in a rush, the gravel crunching beneath her tires. Her hands were trembling. She had to get inside. The house, the safety of it, had to be enough. But as she stepped out of the car, the footprints in the damp dirt, just outside her door. Large, too large. She stared at them, her breath catching in her throat. The prints? Wrong. Too long. Too thin. Like something that was crawling. They led up the front steps. Number no, no, no. Her pulse pounded. Was someone here? The porch light flickered above her, casting strange shadows dancing across the yard. Eldra's skin prickled, her hair standing on end. The cold feeling, it gripped her. She had to get inside to lock the doors, but that feeling in her chest didn't go away. That feeling of being watched. She bolted inside, slammed the door shut, and locked it. But the house felt different. Wrong. The silence was too much. The air was thick with it. Eldra checked the windows, the locks, every corner, every shadow. Her hands were shaking, but she forced herself to be methodical. She wasn't alone. The feeling pressed against her, suffocating her. It was like something was just beyond the door, beyond the walls, waiting, watching. And then she saw it. The door to her bedroom slightly ajar. Eldra froze. Her blood ran cold. Something was in there, something wrong. Her feet carried her forward against her will. She couldn't help it. She had to see. Every step felt heavier than the last. The hallway stretched, twisted, like the house was too big. It was like she couldn't get any closer to the door, but her legs moved without her consent. Breathe. She forced herself to take a breath, to steady herself. Reaching for the door handle, she felt a chill spread across her skin. The room was dark, but not empty. Her phone vibrating on the nightstand. Shaking, Eldra grabbed it. Unknown number. Her stomach turned. She answered, unable to stop herself. "Hello?" she whispered, barely above a breath. There was no answer, just a long pause, filled with a silence so deep it felt suffocating. Then the voice. Her voice. Breathing. Labored. Ragged. A whisper, barely audible. "I'm still here." The line went dead. Eldra's legs gave out beneath her. The phone slipped from her fingers. Her body froze. A cold dread crept into her bones. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Then she turned. To the closet. It was ajar, the shadows inside thick, swirling. And there, standing in the dark, it. A thing. Too tall, too thin, the skin stretched too tight across its bones, its eyes wide and empty. Hollow. It moved. Closer. Closer. Eldra stumbled back, gasping for air as her feet caught on the rug. Her mind screamed at her to run, to get out, but her body would not move. The thing reached out toward her. And that was when everything went dark. The next morning, Eldra's neighbor found her front door wide open. The porch light still flickered above. The car was parked in the driveway, the keys still in the ignition. But Eldra was gone. Her phone was found on the bedroom floor, cracked. One missed call from an unknown number.